Okay, so now we can chat about the lymphatic system. So some objectives for the lymphatic system. It's a little bit longer than the blood vessels, so there will be a little bit more involved, but we want to make sure we understand the functions of the lymphatic system, identify anatomy of the lymphatic system, understand the flow of lymph, and also understand innate and adaptive immunity. And I want you to make sure that you understand which cells are involved and where when we're talking about innate or adaptive immunity. So just starting, well, what is the lymphatic system? It consists of two semi-independent parts. You have the lymphatic vessels and the lymphoid tissues and organs. And then they function to balance fluids in the body as well as control immunity and your response to the environment around you based on what you have provided. And so fluid balance and immunity are the main functions of the lymphatic system. Some of the characters that are involved in the lymphatic system would be lymphatic vessels, all the green. You have lymphatic organs such as red bone marrow, the thymus, and your spleen. And then you have lymph nodes and lymph nodules. Lymph nodules would be like your tonsils, or you also have Peyer's patches in your intestines. So lymph is excess tissue or tissue fluid that's carried by lymphatic vessels. It carries cells of the immune system, ions, nutrients, proteins, hormones, wastes, basically everything that isn't circulating within blood or some of the byproducts of cellular activity. So there will be cell debris in there. You'll carry the pathogens through here, cancer cells that have been broken down, all that. A major distinction between the lymphatic and cardiovascular systems in humans is that lymph is not actually actively pumped by the heart, but it's forced through vessels by the movements of the body, such as the contraction of skeletal muscles and breathing. This is very similar to the muscular pump of the venous system. So think about it in a similar fashion. Movements of the body, such as your skeletal muscles contracting or breathing, kind of like the respiratory pump, help move that lymph back. So there's not a whole lot of pressure in the lymph system, but your body moving helps move it along. Just like veins, there are one-way valves to ensure the flow toward the heart. And the flow goes from lymph capillaries in the capillary beds to lymph vessels to a lymph duct and then veins near the heart. So right before they get to the heart, that's where they get dumped into. And the specific location is going to be in the jugular and subclavian veins in the neck. So lymphatic capillaries are formed by one cell thick layer of endothelial cells, and they represent the open end of the system, allowing interstitial fluid to flow into them via overlapping cells. That's what these flaps are. And so when interstitial pressure is low, the endothelial flaps close and prevent flow into them. And as interstitial pressure increases, the spaces between the cells open up, allowing the fluid to enter. Entry of the fluid into the lymphatic capillaries is also enabled by the collagen filaments that anchor the capillaries to surrounding structures. As the interstitial pressure increases, the filaments pull on the endothelial cell flaps, opening them even further to allow easy entry of the fluid. And so what you kind of need to know is just a higher pressure of interstitial fluid leads to the fluid leaking into the lymphatic vessels. But now where does lymph enter back into the bloodstream? I mentioned this earlier, but the overall drainage system of the body is asymmetrical. The lymph return into circulation is near the heart on both sides though. The right lymphatic duct receives lymph from only the right upper half of the body, or upper right side of the body, I should say, because it's not the lower right. And then the lymph from the rest of the body enters through the thoracic duct, drains in, then into the subclavian vein. So when you think of right lymphatic duct, think of right upper body. When you think of left or thoracic duct, you can think of basically everything else. So left upper body and also lower body. And then now we can talk about some of the organs involved in the lymph system. So designating between the two types, we have primary and secondary lymphoid organs. Primary develop and mature lymphocytes. So this will be your red bone marrow and your thymus. And thymus mostly is just during childhood. And then your secondary lymphoid organs are going to concentrate these lymphocytes. And so they'll already be mature at this point. But this will be like your lymph nodes, your spleen, your lymphoid nodules like your tonsils and Peyer's patches. Lymphocytes develop and mature in the primary lymphoid organs, but they mount the immune response in the secondary lymphoid organs. A naive lymphocyte is one that has left the primary organ and entered a secondary lymphoid organ. Naive lymphocytes are fully functional immunologically, but have yet to encounter an antigen to respond to. And in addition to circulating in the blood and lymph, lymphocytes concentrate in secondary lymphoid organs, which include the lymph nodes, spleen, and lymphoid nodules, like I said. So this graphic shows the location of the lymphoid tissues. Notice how large the bone marrow surface would take up, as well as the thymus. So you have bones everywhere, right? And the bone marrow would have a lot of surface area for stimulating the production of those white blood cells. And then they mature there. T cells in particular mature in the thymus. And then that's where the lymphocytes again would be developed and matured. But the secondary lymphoid organs would be there, or it would be where the mature lymphocytes concentrate, other than circulating through the blood and the lymph. And that would be your tonsils. And think about this in your pharyngeal region and your oral region. And then your spleen and your stomach area. And then your Peyer's patches in your intestines. And you also have your appendix. And so the spleen is sometimes called the filter of the blood because of its extensive vascularization and the presence of macrophages and dendritic cells that remove microbes and other materials from the blood, including dying red blood cells. The spleen also functions as the location of immune responses to blood-borne pathogens. And so it's got this deep red color because it's helping store platelets in blood. And it's also getting rid of old red blood cells. And so taking those apart and using that system to store everything. The lymph nodes are similar to the spleen in harboring an immune response and also filter the lymph fluid from damaged cells and cancer cells. So lymph nodes are concentrated around the neck, the armpits, your groin region, and your abdomen, and then also in your chest a little bit too. You can't really see it too well here. But there are hundreds of them, and they can become swollen when mounting They can become swollen when mounting an immune response. And so, if on your right side of your neck, you can kind of feel one. If you kind of start going down a little bit, you have a lymph node, more than likely that you can feel. And then when you're sick, try to feel that same spot, and it might be a little bit swollen. And so, children especially have really strong lymph lymph node responses that can be kind of unsettling sometimes if you don't know what you're looking for, and just like this big lump on their neck, like what is that? Like, is that cancer? But more often than not, it's just a lymph node that is mounting an immune response. And the other lymphoid tissues, the lymphoid nodules, have a simpler architecture than the spleen and lymph nodes, in that they consist of a dense cluster of lymphocytes without surrounding fibrous capsule. So these nodules are located in the respiratory and digestive tracts. And so your respiratory tract, you have your tonsils, and your digestive tract, you have your Peyer's patches. And these are areas that are routinely exposed to environmental pathogens, right? When you first eat something or breathe something in, your tonsils are right there getting in contact. And if you eat something and ingest something and it gets down to your belly, well, your Peyer's patches are down there to help mount that immune response. They're ready. So your tonsils are lymphoid nodules located along the inner surface of the pharynx, and these are important for, I guess they're just in general, just think they're important for developing immunity to oral pathogens. And so the tonsil is located at the back of the throat. The pharyngeal tonsil is sometimes referred to as the adenoid when it's swollen. And this seems to be the major function of tonsils, to help children's bodies recognize, destroy, and develop immunity to common environmental pathogens so that they will be protected in their later lives. Tonsils are often removed in those children who have recurring throat infections, especially those that are involved or involving the palatine tonsils on either side of the throat, and whose swelling could interfere with breathing and or swallowing in these children. And then the Peyer's patches are an aggregate of lymphoid follicles directly associated with the mucous membrane epithelia, and this is in the small intestine. And so they're especially important for immune responses against ingested substances. So if you eat something that someone coughed on, has viral stuff on it, these will be helping mount that immune response once it gets there. They contain specialized endothelial cells that sample material from the intestinal lumen, like inside the intestines, and transport that to nearby follicles so that an adaptive immune response to potential pathogens can be mounted. And a similar process occurs in the mucosa and submucosa of the appendix. A blockage of the lumen triggers those cells to elicit an inflammatory response, but that could lead to appendicitis, which is why many believe the appendix has played a role in the immune system at some point in our evolutionary history. But that still isn't quite clear. We know it does have a role when it comes to fighting off pathogens, though.